During the Second World War, there were a number of commandants of the concentration camps who were known for their evil and brutality. Men such as Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, became infamous for their killing operations, but one man who lived like a king whilst many were starving and suffering inside of his own facility was Karl Otto Koch. He was the commandant of Buchenwald Concentration Camp, and he ran a site which was truly and immensely brutal. However, Karl Otto Koch was actually investigated by the Nazi authorities, and it was found that he was stealing huge amounts of valuables and money from the prisoners of the camp, and this property technically belonged to the Third Reich and the Nazi state. Because of this, he was sacked, and was actually inside of his former concentration camp, executed by the SS, being shot for his embezzlement and crimes. He was shot weeks before World War II came to an end. He was married, though, to one of the most infamous women who would be tried at the end of the war, Ilse Koch, who became known as the Witch of Buchenwald. But what happened during the execution of the Commandant of Buchenwald? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Karl Otto Koch was born on the 2nd of August 1897 inside of Darmstadt, and he had a rather normal upbringing. He completed schooling and then became an apprentice. But as the First World War erupted all across Europe, he, like many German men, chose to join the Imperial German Army and was sent to the front lines of the Western Front. It wasn't long before Karl was captured by the British Army, and he spent the rest of the conflict as a POW, and was later repatriated back to Germany in 1919. He was well decorated during the conflict, but following the cessation of hostilities, Karl Otto Koch returned to a normal life, working as a manager of a business, and he also worked as an insurance agent. But it was within this employment that he would first be convicted for embezzlement and forgery, and he was sacked in 1932 and was actually sent to prison for his crimes. But at the time, in the early 1930s, the Nazi Party were beginning to gather traction, and thousands of people were becoming members every single week. Karl Koch joined the Nazi Party in 1931, and he then joined the SS. To begin with, the Schutzstaffel were a small detachment of bodyguards who kept a very close eye on Adolf Hitler and high-ranking Nazis and protected them. But under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, they would become a force who would have the blood of millions of people on their hands during the later World War II. Karl Koch was part of different SS battalions and units, and in 1934 he was given command of the Sachsenburg concentration camp, one of the first sites opened by the Third Reich. He was later sent to the Esterwegen camp, where he oversaw the guard force, and he was then sent to Lichtenburg, where he served as the chief of the custody camp. He was gaining a lot of experience quickly inside different concentration and imprisonment camps, and at the time the Nazis were locking up mostly those who were known to dissent against them, and they would imprison people who had rival political beliefs to them. But all this work inside the concentration camps did not go without acknowledgement, and on the 1st of August 1937, Karl Otto Koch was appointed as a commandant of the newly created Buchenwald Concentration Camp. This camp would be overseen by Karl Koch from August 1937 until he was dismissed in July 1941, and it was one of the roughest sites used by the Nazis. 280,000 prisoners were sent to the camp throughout its time in operation, and around 56,000 people died from many different problems and causes. Prisoners arrived from all over Europe and the Soviet Union during World War II, and they were all locked up inside of the barracks and were guarded over by brutal beasts who were encouraged by Koch to demonstrate their violence. The conditions of the camp were terrible, and there was immense food shortages, and also executions were carried out at the site, which took the lives of thousands. There were even secret execution areas set up known as the next shooting facility, in which prisoners were shot inside false medical buildings. Thousands died within these rooms, overseen by Koch's firing squads. Evil guards such as Walter Gerhard Martin Sommer were employed by Koch, and he was known as the hangman, and he even crucified upside down 2 priests within the camp's forests nearby. When Buchenwald was liberated, one man who witnessed the terror of the camp claimed, "I asked to see one of the barracks. It happened to be occupied by Czechoslovaks. When I entered, men crowded around, tried to lift me to their shoulders. They were too weak. Many of them could not get out of bed. I was told that this building had once stabled 80 horses. There were 1,200 men in it, 5 to a bunk. The stink was beyond all description. They called the doctor. We inspected his records. There were only names in a little black book, nothing more. Nothing about who these men were, what they'd done or hoped. Behind the names of those who had died, there was a cross. I counted them. They totalled 242. 242 out of 1,200 in just 1 month. As we walked out into the courtyard, a man fell dead. 2 others, they must have been over 60, were crawling towards the latrine. I saw it, but will not describe it. Inside of the camp, Karl Otto Koch walked around the camp like a king. He had huge building projects constructed for he and his wife Ilse's pleasure, and a large horse riding area was made. Ilse Koch would parade around the site on horseback, and if a prisoner looked at her, she often had them dragged away to be executed. But Karl Otto Koch would later be sacked from his work at the camp. In 1941 he was under investigation by the SS for improper behaviour. Despite being murderers of millions, the SS investigated their own commandants for their actions. Karl Koch was accused of corruption, embezzlement, fraud, drunkenness and murder. He was later transferred to Majdanek concentration camp briefly, and was relieved of his actions as 86 Soviet prisoners escaped under his watch, and he was also accused of negligence. But he was, as mentioned, under investigation by specifically SS Obergruppenführer Josias, the Prince of Waldeck and Piedmont. He had noticed Karl Otto Koch's reign of terror, and he investigated, and it was discovered that prisoners had been shot when they shouldn't have been. A full investigation of the camp turned out more evidence of massacre and slaughter, and Koch had even given out illegal orders to execute and kill prisoners himself. Further evidence emerged about the scale of the embezzlement and theft carried out by the Kochs from prisoners of Buchenwald, and with this they were arrested and were then locked up inside of different prisons to await their trial. The truth was that the couple had been stealing so much wealth that they themselves had become probably millionaires, but this property, under the laws and rules of the Nazis, technically belonged to the Reich following confiscation and the Nazis, and with this action, Karl Otto Koch was in a sense stealing from the pocket of Adolf Hitler. SS Judge Konrad Morgan was the one who indicted Karl and Ilse Koch on the 17th of August 1944, and the former commandant was charged with embezzlement and concealing of funds and goods to the amount of at least 200,000 Reichmarks, and also premeditated murder of 3 prisoners to stop them giving evidence in the SS investigation. Karl's wife was also charged with habitual receiving of stolen goods and taking for her benefit at least 25,000 Reichmarks. For his crimes, Karl Otto Koch was sentenced to death by the SS court for heaping disrepute on the evil organisation, which, let's face it, is rather ironic. He was locked up inside various Nazi prisons for some time, but eventually, as the Second World War was coming to an end, Karl Otto Koch was transferred to Buchenwald Concentration Camp, the very site which he oversaw with so much brutality. He was locked up in special imprisonment cells, and it was clear that the SS wanted to keep him separate from the other prisoners, and they wanted to ensure that his crimes did not come back to haunt the organisation. On the 5th of April 1945, Karl Otto Koch was taken out of his prison cell, and he was walked to the execution block, a place inside of Buchenwald that he knew very well. He was marched out in front of a quickly gathered firing squad made up of other SS members, and the instructions had come from the top, as in Heinrich Himmler, to have Karl Otto Koch executed. He was paraded in front of the firing squad and had a blindfold tied around his eyes, but very quickly the firing squad then shot, and they brought the life of the former commandant of Buchenwald to a sharp and ruthless end. There is another account in which, because of the haste in which he needed to be executed, Karl Koch may have been shot by a sole executioner who pointed a pistol at the back of his head and then fired. Following his death a week later, the American forces arrived to liberate Buchenwald. There were rumours that his body was burned inside of the camp's crematoria, But at this time, resources at the site were running very low, and there was actually no coal to burn the bodies. Under the cover of darkness, Koch's body was taken out of the camp, and it was dumped in a grave in an unmarked location, and it probably still lies there today, presumably in the forest. Karl Otto Koch was one of a number of other SS commandants and leaders inside of the concentration camps who would be executed inside of their own camp. Another man who faced this was Rudolf Höss, but he was executed following a war crimes trial on a gallows constructed specially inside of Auschwitz. Karl Otto Koch was a man who was said to have defrauded and embezzled one of the most evil organisations in history, the SS, and he was sentenced to death for mostly stealing money from the prisoners of the concentration camps, which should have been absorbed into the Reich. But in a strange twist, he was taken to his former camp at Buchenwald, and he was actually executed there. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.